You're watching India Today Global with me, Geeta Mohan and Shashank Mattu. What we're going to bring to you is to the global audience that there's some big news coming in from India. It's the Indian government that took oath yesterday, and now we're looking at cabinet portfolios, ministerial portfolios that have been announced. Not most of them have been announced in terms of official document that's out or notification, but this is information that we're getting from our bureaus, from our reporters, and from ministers who actually themselves coming out, Shashank, and announcing it. But very interesting to see that the CCS, which is Cabinet Committee on Security, remains the same. There was a lot of speculation, Shank, that there could be changes. Will Amit Shah be moved? Will Jaishankar retain? So we see that CCS stays the same.
Absolutely. And look, if I was a global diplomat right now looking at India's government, I'd say, look, this is pretty much exactly what we were dealing with before. Amit Shah remains in the Home Ministry, Defense Ministry remains with Rajnath Singh, and Finance as well with Minister Sitharaman, and of course External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. So it really seems like the key decision makers on India's foreign policy and its national security remain essentially the same. And as you go through the list of ministers, you see that a lot of real heavy hitters who were there in the previous government as well have been retained this time.
So basically what we're talking about is continuity over here.
Absolutely.
A lot of people, a lot of governments speculating whether if there's going to be continuity. First, there was this whole speculation that not only will there be continuity, there'll be more firming of the Indian administration with the numbers that everybody speculated, Shashank. And then we saw that there was certainly weakening of the party, but yes, a return of Modi government in a coalition. And that coalition we'll talk about, because interesting ministries have gone to the coalition partners.
Absolutely.
But despite that, what we're looking at over here is now continuity, stability, but also in a certain way, do you think that with the coalition partners who've come in, there might be a little bit of tempering down of things that may not have been a part of the conversations during Modi 1.0 and 2.0?
I think that's absolutely a part of coalition dynamics. That always happens. I think that, and especially when it comes to foreign policy, whenever you have a coalition government, you have new dynamics that come into place. And of course on national policy as well. I mean, if you look at the influence that the left front, for example, had on the UPA government during the first coalition of the first UPA term. I mean, of course, the India-US nuclear deal, that was something that was a very big foreign policy move that was sort of held up by the left front. So every time there's a coalition in India, there are different priorities, both at the domestic stage as well as the national stage. You are unable to push certain things as strongly as you would like, and that is definitely true of the BJP as well. They've come down from having really a very, very strong coalition to very much a majority, but very much also a reduced majority. It has been a loss of their parliamentary majority as well. So I think their hard-charging style on certain issues will have to be replaced by a certainly more cooperative style. What that will mean for how India projects itself abroad is a very interesting question. We've had questions about Hindutva and about how much that will be a part of India's foreign policy.
Okay, so let's break it down for our viewers over here. CCS. Let's just focus, Shashank, on CCS, because we know that if you log on to any of the Indian channels now, they'll talk about all other ministries.
Absolutely.
But for us, let's focus on CCS, because that certainly is going to be the focus area for all important governments who are watching Indian televisions or Indian broadcasting, Indian broadcast from any source. Beginning with should we begin with Jaishankar or should we begin with the Home Minister?
Well, I think we can begin with the Home Minister, because I think we should say best for last.
Okay, all right. So Home Minister Amit Shah, he retains his position. He's received a lot of accolades from or adulation from within, but certain criticism from outside.
Right.
Would we see a continuity there with Nitish Kumar now and Chandrababu Naidu, two very important coalition partners who've come out and said that there cannot be as much divisiveness as there was?
Right.
Now we're seeing Home Minister Amit Shah again returning as the Home Minister of India, somebody who's held the security apparatus within the country quite strongly together.
Absolutely.
What's your reading on how the West, the East, the countries abroad are going to look at it?
Right, absolutely. I think the Home Minister is in many ways the number 2 person in the government, really one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful minister, aside from the Prime Minister in any government. And Amit Shah certainly has owned that role and has grown into it, and has, he came from being simply a party man. At least that was a reputation some people thought of him, but he came in and very much dominated.
He still is a party man.
Yes, absolutely. But
he still is a party man.
Absolutely.
He knows exactly how the party runs. In fact, he runs the party in many ways than one.
But he's also managed to step into the shoes of Home Minister, being an administrator and a governor as well. But as you were mentioning, there have been, of course, talks about how India has performed, especially, for example, on internal security challenges during his tenure. We had, of course, you've had a number of news reports coming in, seeing how India has fought its internal security challenges, especially in what used to be called the Red Belt, the Maoist belt. There has been a substantial improvement in India's position in terms of a security apparatus, in terms of fighting those challenges during his term. But also, I think in the internal dynamics of the country, he's also been seen as a very powerful home minister who sometimes, states have been sort of afraid of him in many ways because of the power he has. So I think that with, as you were mentioning, more state, someone like Chandrababu Naidu, someone like Nitish Kumar, people who've been chief ministers who understand that dynamic between center and state, how will they react? Will they be a more restraining influence on the Home Minister's authority to work with the states? Will that lead to more federalism, perhaps?
But that's where, Shashank, we'll have to also look at another very important aspect. Now, we're talking about internal security, which also spills over to external factors and external security. And in that, there's one rising concern where Amit Shah will have to look at how he's going to deal with it, which is the Khalistani issue.
Sure.
Now, we will talk about it on the external front when we discuss defense and specifically foreign affairs, which is External Affairs Ministry.
Right.
But there are two Khalistani sympathizers who are going to sit in parliament. One might not because he's still in prison. But there's still two Khalistani sympathizers who have been voted back in. For anybody who's looking at this entire scenario, for people who are looking at Canada, for people from Canada who are looking at news and maybe watching our broadcast right now, it'll be quite interesting to see how he looks at containing this problem. Now, we have had Khalistani problem for a very long time, Shashank. But before the Modi administration, it was always a problem, but there was no resonance back home. In the recent past, with the heightened sort of, conversations, reporting, messaging on Khalistan, or whether you're summoning an ambassador, a high commissioner or not, we've really seen this space now being taken over. Also, it didn't help matters when the farm protests were taking place and certain quarters called all farmers Khalistanis that actually moved a lot of these farmers into going and sympathizing with these Khalistani extremists. And that's why we see two Khalistani sympathizers now actually
in parliament, if they manage to take their seats.
In parliament. So how do you suppose Amit Shah is looking at this problem that could persist or that could go on for a while?
No, I think that's absolutely an important concern. I think that the number of commentators have pointed out this specific issue, that you have to look at disaffection in Punjab. This is idea that whether you look at Kashmir or you look at Punjab, this election threw up a number of Engineer Rashid getting elected in Kashmir. You had...
again, that's interesting, but we'll come back to that.
We'll have to come back to that. but really the point being that, there are concerns that, look, any home ministers now are going to have to deal with these challenges, right? Which is that people with their ballot boxes and their votes are telling you how they feel about a particular issue. Punjab, we know, has been a state that has had a very, very difficult history with these sorts of challenges. The general narrative in the country is that, Punjab has recovered from these challenges, much more stable, much more secure. But of course, there have been major economic issues, lots of problems with youth migrating out. So I think, and of course now with those foreign diasporas, you also have that question of sympathy for the Khalistani cause. So it's definitely an interlinked problem, and I think that is going to be a concern, because as disaffection rises, you're going to have to take a much closer, much harder look at, are we going to see a resurgence of this problem in the years to come? It's a very good question, and I think that's what's going to occupy the Home Minister's mind, along with, of course, the problems in Kashmir, the problems in the Red Belt in the southeast portion of the country.
Now, the fact that you mentioned Kashmir and Engineer Rashid, a major part of the conversation before the elections and even after has been about how there has been peace has returned to the valley. There's normalcy. Of course, we've seen much reduced incidents of violence and especially terrorist attacks
Right.
in the valley. That certainly has happened. But the fact that people over here use their vote to say something, voting Rashid engineer
Right.
in is saying something. Omar Abdullah,
Right.
a secular man who's held India and the Indian flag and the constitution very close to his heart, has lost to engineer Rashid.
Right. Absolutely.
That how does BJP explain this? A factor where we could have a man in parliament who could just be talking about, Azad Kashmir, if not
Right.
anything else.
Absolutely, and I think this is the big issue. I think that this is the one question on the campaign trail, even going back. I think, of course, since the shock of the election result, people haven't talked about it very much, but very much this idea that, look, and we can speak very freely and frankly about this, that, before the elections happened, there was this whole idea that, and of course, I come from Kashmir, that's a small fact about me.
Yes.
And of course, the conversation everywhere was that, look, Kashmir is turned a corner, there's all this tourism coming in, it's progressing so much. And I think the idea was that you're going to see that reflected in this new political compass as well. And much of the idea behind the abrogation of Article 370 was also to say that, look, the status quo in Kashmir with status quo political parties and so on is not working for India. We need a new political consensus. We need something new in Kashmir to shake up the politics. And of course, Article 370, this seems like the opposite of what might have been expected, which is that you now have Omar Abdullah being defeated quite handily at the polls by engineer Rashid. So I think this is a serious concern, which is that it does raise a question about whether the narrative that was sort of being talked about, how much does that really hold up now after this election result? Because you can talk about it all you want, but if people vote with their ballot boxes in a particular way, and this is what you get.
To keep silent and then go ahead and then
Elect
use your vote
Absolutely.
to elect the exact opposite of what you would have thought
Right.
would have been the result,
Absolutely.
or should have been the result, if you say that these elements have been completely rooted out.
Absolutely, and the BJP sort of not contesting any seats in the valley as well. That was seen as a quite.
And also that nobody was talking about it till people started talking about it and said, if it is so good and if they've made
Right.
such a huge change,
Absolutely.
then why are they not contesting?
Absolutely.
But that's an aside. Let's talk about defense then.
Yes.
Defense, again, another major issue for India would be, the biggest challenge certainly would be China.
China, absolutely.
We still have Chinese forces at the border. We still have them in areas that traditionally, now we're not saying whose area, who's not, Shashank, because a lot of people say that, they've entered Indian territory. We claim it as ours.
Right.
They claim it as theirs. That area is patrolling ground. So
Absolutely.
yes, let's make it very clear. But कोई घुसा नहीं है या घुसा है is a contention where for us they have breached the traditional areas where they were not supposed to be, and it has led to a lot of violence, and they're still there. So is that the biggest challenge for
Right.
Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, or are there other defense
So it's a slew of
related?
different.
Yeah,
it's a slew of different things.
Okay, let's
so
go.
I definitely think that China is a big part of the challenge. In more ways than one. Absolutely, that eyeball to eyeball confrontation, which is of course not as much eyeball to eyeball now, because you've had disengagements in particular parts of the northern sector, where in 2020 you had this major border clash. So that's certainly a problem. Yes. China's military modernization is also a problem. That is something that China moving into the Indian Ocean is a big deal, and there have been questions about whether the Indian defense forces are modernizing fast enough to do what they need to, expand their navy, expand the air force, and really become technologized enough to take on the Chinese military. This is definitely a huge problem. I think building infrastructure on the border to ensure that we are able to better supply troops on the border, improve our mobility, that's also going to be a big focus for the defense minister. I think those definitely, China fits that bill in terms of a big policy priority. But I also think a major priority is going to be political with the Agniveer scheme. We have heard a lot about the various parties, JDU asking for a review of the Agniveer scheme. I think by now this is settled fact that the scheme, which basically, and we'll of course explain the Agniveer scheme, essentially the idea was that we have the Indian Armed Forces, which recruit people for a period of, they serve for about 15-20 years, and then they go home and they earn a pension. But the problem for the armed forces then is that they have so many enlisted men that the pension burden for the exchequer becomes extremely high. And so if you're a military or the defense minister, you want India to move towards a leaner, meaner, more technologically advanced and equipped military. You don't want to spend so much money on pensions, and so you went to Agniveer, which was hiring young men for.
Okay, here also there's a difference. Now, in the Indian military, you do have short-term services, but that's for officers.
Absolutely.
What Agniveer really provides again is cutting down, making it lean, mean for the
enlisted personnel. That's right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes.
So that was the idea, and so they would come in for a period of 4 years. They'd be given a pay package once they left, but they would not get the same sort of long service or the benefits that they would get if they had served the entire term.
Because you cannot get the same benefits and pension after serving 4 years. You can get maybe a lump sum amount because you've not served 20 years. You've not given 20 years of your life in the army.
Absolutely.
Although Shashank, most of them would want to.
Right. Absolutely. And that's become a huge thing. I think, there's been a very big conversation, I think, in many states that are
especially
prime
Haryana.
recruiting. Absolutely. And places that are prime recruiting ground for the army. There are lots of people, I mean, you can see this all across on the ground that, people want to join the army, but many of them are now moving towards central paramilitary forces and other areas where they can be in armed service, but the benefits are better. And there's been this very, very palpable sense of anger against the BJP for bringing something like this on. So the allies, the JDU, made very clear that it wants a review of this scheme. And so I think that will be a very delicate political priority, because how do you balance, because for the last 20-25 years, every major committee that's looked at defense reform has also said that, look, we need to ensure that we're spending less money on pensions and more on cutting edge technology, so we're more technologized.
But also because there was a need to show that we are increasing employment.
Right.
And this would have certainly increased employment for those years.
Absolutely.
And then the dip, which I don't know how many governments would have really cared for or cared about. So yes, over here, there is going to be maybe a slight policy change or a policy review, not because of anything else, but because this is a coalition government.
Absolutely.
And coalition partners maybe are not very comfortable with this idea. But that's certainly something that the defense minister and the defense ministry will really have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Now, this again is something that, Shashank, foreign governments have been looking at very, very closely, because they did see disillusionment. They were trying to read what this Agniveer scheme is all about, and why there is so much of discontentment and opposition to this whole idea. So that certainly is again going to be a major issue for the government to handle. But there are many other areas also where, in terms of defense, technology, there are some ups too. There could be some very important defense deals that the two countries are going to look at. Forward movement with the United States of America when it comes to technology transfer, and more movement in terms of acquisitions. Those are areas that certainly will be covered by the defense minister. But we'll again have to wait and see how the defense ministry and how the defense forces are going to look at the China challenge, which is going to be very big. And it's not only big because we're talking about the Ladakh sector, we're talking about Arunachal Pradesh. It's going to be big because you see with the Israel-Hamas war and Russia-Ukraine war, Taiwan is now becoming very important, and we have sent our vessels in the vicinity, in the area. Southeast Asia is very important for us, so we'll have to wait and see how that really pans out for us. There already has been a spat between India and China about over Taiwan.
That's a big deal.
Congratulating Prime Minister Modi.
That's true.
And them saying whatever the president that the so-called president,
yes, of the Taiwan region, which there is no
so-called.
President of the Taiwan region. Absolutely. That was a big deal.
That's going to be very interesting.
Absolutely.
But then again, we have a few more, two more very important ministries, which is the finance ministry. There are a lot of challenges when it comes to how the economy will revive. And one very important area that the world has been looking at and that the governments have been focused on is, Shashank, supply chain alternatives.
Very big.
And India is where they look to. You think Modi 3.0 can really do it?
I think that this is going to be one of those defining challenges that makes or breaks the legacy of the Modi government, right? Because I can remember 10 years ago, the BJP, sort of harping on the FDI figures, sort of saying that, look, we were getting great amounts of FDI into the country. The problem now is that you have FDI globally is declining. You can't blame the BJP for that. But the problem also is that India is getting a lesser share of the FDI that's flowing in around the world, right? So this is a concern as well. There have been major concerns about this.
Even in supply chain alternatives.
Absolutely.
They've looked at Vietnam
right,
as a manufacturing
yes,
hub.
Yes.
And they've not come to us.
And the thing is, and the problem is, you look at many countries and they say, look, Vietnam is easier to do business, and this is, this whole debate between India as a federalist system, it's a democracy, it's a messy democracy, Vietnam is a one-party autocracy. So I think that countering that narrative, getting businesses to come here, making the reforms that they need, and this is one of the big challenges, because I feel like, of course, we've talked about signature schemes that the BJP has done. So I think making sure that the reforms that are needed to get foreign investment into the country, to make business easier in India, that's going to be this defining challenge for economic policy in India. And I think that the elections sort of told us something about that as well. I think this idea of unemployment, about sort of this silent unemployment vote sort of coming out and saying that, look, there is just desperation in many parts of the country. I think that's going to be working on the, we talk about the demographic dividend, about India being a young country. If you don't have jobs, that becomes a challenge. So that's the demographic dividend is one issue. Making policy changes that you need so that you can get more foreign investment is really the second big issue that the finance sector is going to have to work with.
There's one good area that we can talk about and look at, although I don't know whether that's really trickled to the public,
right,
which is why we're looking at soaring fuel prices.
Sure.
Is how India managed to keep its position and be able to buy
Russian oil, right,
in cheaper price, but it just didn't trickle down.
Absolutely.
What happened?
I think it's a good question. This is a frequent concern about fuel prices and how much the government decides to tax fuel, because of course it's a major money earner for the government of India. So whenever the price of fuel shoots up, the demand from the public is always, look, then can you please take less money in terms of tax and make it easier for us to afford fuel. But I think
that is something.
And then it's always a big fiscal balancing act for the government. So it's definitely always a concern. I think lots of people have faced it. The BJP government has always, I think, faced this sort of criticism about its handling.
So we're in between foreign policy and finance over here,
right,
because the next question again and the next topic was also the same. We talk about how India has done well for itself in becoming a means, or the Indian currency becoming a means of exchange,
right, absolutely,
with another country without dollar being
sure,
the means
right,
for trade,
mm-hmm,
or the mode of payment.
Absolutely.
This de-dollarization,
mm-hmm,
whilst does not make America very happy,
mm-hmm,
has really become the new thing with many countries, many smaller countries.
Right.
But also, while India is very close to the West, and it's not an act to de-dollarize the economy, it certainly works well for Russia and China and many other countries who are not very close to the West, to say that, okay, well, Iran particularly,
absolutely,
and we've been doing the same kind of trade with Iran for a very long time. It works well for them to say, well, this does lead to de-dollarization.
Right.
And the conversation began after the Russia-Ukraine war, when Russia said, okay, if we are sanctioned and there can be no payments in dollars,
right,
let's do local currency swap or local currency exchange.
I think the local currency thing is important, because I think every country around the world understands, and Indian diplomats have talked about this very openly. I think diplomats around the world have talked about this openly, right? That after the Ukraine war, the weaponization of financial systems like SWIFT against Russia by America, you may have your views about the Ukraine war, but the idea, and whether Russia was justified, but the idea was that people were scared, or at least governments were very, very perturbed by the idea that, look, they can essentially be kicked out of something that's really a building block of the global financial system. And I think that India began to look at that, and many countries around the world began to look at that and said, how can we start insulating ourselves against this? How can we think about economic security, not just physical security, economic security? And I think that, in terms of the use of rupee trade, as we call it, right? To countries, instead of using dollars to settle trade, will use rupees. I think that for India, it's made moves in this regard, especially in its neighborhood. We see these moves with Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, and so on. So I think that definitely this idea that India, especially in its neighborhood, with the countries that it does a lot of trade, if it can begin there as a building block, and then look at what happens in other parts of the world, perhaps further afield in African countries, I think that would be a good start.
Absolutely.
But
you
I
mentioned Africa, so the areas now that we'll be covering is our final one, because we're only going to do CCS. For everything else, you can tune into our sister networks. They're going on about who gets what ministry. For us, the CCS is important because it's important for the countries across the globe who are watching, monitoring, and wanted to know very badly as to who gets what and which ministry. Dr. Jaishankar retains External Affairs Ministry. He was there early in the morning, and we thought that the cabinet note will come early in the morning. So we thought we'll go live with the fact that Jaishankar will be assuming charge. He didn't do that.
No, he did
But
not.
the biggest hint, Shashank, was when he still went ahead
And
called on all the 7 foreign dignitaries who are in
Absolutely.
India. They were here for the oath-taking ceremony. It clearly showed India's messaging. Near neighborhood is important. Neighbors are important, whether it is on the Eastern Front or, for that matter, the Indian Ocean, Sagar diplomacy, all, I think, with their eyes on one country alone,
Right.
and what that country is doing and how that country has built itself
Right.
in these regions, which is China. So Jaishankar as External Affairs Ministry,
Absolutely.
continuity, yet change, or continuity with a bit of change?
You know, I think it's certainly definitely going to be continuity with some change, because whenever, look, a foreign minister, especially a foreign minister like Dr. Jaishankar, who is not a career politician, he's a career diplomat appointed by the Prime Minister. In many ways, his power and influence around the world depends on the Prime Minister Modi's power and influence around the world, because people, when they speak to him, as a foreign minister, if you have a direct line to your Prime Minister, people know that when they talk to you, you know, you'll be able to deliver. If Dr. Jaishankar goes out and says, I will deliver this for you, then countries are confident that that will happen. We will have to see how...
It does help. It does help to
Absolutely.
have someone who knows foreign policy
Right.
like no other,
Absolutely.
who's grown up in that ecosystem.
Right.
But does that also make him like almost living in a bubble, not understanding how the dynamics work outside?
I think that's...
Or has
yeah.
he grown as a politician?
I think he certainly captured the public imagination about foreign policy, which in many ways is part of the job of being a politician. I think that, I think we can speak to this quite frankly, as we are journalists. I think the idea was that 15, 20 years ago, really, who cared about foreign policy, right? But I think that Jaishankar sort of coming in, capturing the public imagination, sort of becoming the face of this new, more assertive India, more confident India. I think he was one of the first foreign ministers. I think who people really noticed, who people could really tell you, yeah, Jaishankar is the foreign minister.
Well,
so I think
he certainly became famous. I can tell you that his videos got
Absolutely.
more views and attention than any minister in the Modi cabinet,
absolutely.
sometimes even more than Prime Minister Modi.
You had that
himself.
extraordinary clip where Piyush Goyal, who is the Commerce Minister and will of course stay on as Commerce Minister, we were told, he sort of walked up to Jaishankar at a event and said, "You are a rock star." So if one of your own cabinet colleagues is sort of saying that you are a rock star, I think it says a lot. But I think that with Dr. Jaishankar, just to go back very quickly to what we were saying earlier, which is that I think certainly there will be a lot of continuity in terms of the BJP and the government's policy priorities, working closely with America, working closely with the Quad, sort of still taking a tough line on China. But I do think that a lot of foreign countries will look very carefully at how the coalition goes moving forward. If you are unable to make this coalition work effectively, if you're unable to get strong things like economic reforms passed, land reforms passed, and so on and so forth, because you don't have the kind of numbers that you had before, you are a diminished figure politically. And if Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a diminished figure politically, then that will reflect in what Dr. Jaishankar is able to do abroad. Because when people say people bet on Narendra Modi to get something done and take a difficult decision, they know that he's going to be able to see it through because he has a majority.
I was talking to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and he said that, you see, on one thing there will always be sort of continuity, which is foreign policy.
Absolutely.
Because no party would want to work against India's interests. We will be playing that interview out tomorrow, but it is a very important message coming from a very important leader of the Congress party. So yes, there will be continuity, but I do think that there are certain areas where, like you said, if it's not a very strong government, which it is, but it still is not as strong.
Right.
If it's a weakened party, then some of the things might not fly the way it flew, especially in the second term, which is the Hindutva policies,
Sure.
or pushing the Hindu agenda, or explaining the Hindu agenda, saying that, I don't think that will carry weight anymore.
I think it's a good question. I think we'll have to see, because the sense I get is neither the JDU nor the TDP are really all that interested in foreign policy. Let's be clear. So I think
But they said, we don't want divisive politics.
absolutely. So
that's what JDU
so
said.
there's a question.
Not
So will a coalition government, for example, back the CA NRC bill in the way that the BJP did for a while? CA, of course, had foreign policy implications as well. You had Bangladesh was a big foreign policy implication.
And interestingly, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina went ahead and in a not so rare gesture, because they've been friends for a very long time, but in the recent past, I have not seen them really meet.
Absolutely.
Went or whatever, the Congress leaders went and met Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, which is Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, and Priyanka Gandhi. And if you see the visuals, you'll know they hugged each other. It was a very warm meeting. Clearly, the tide has changed a little.
I think so. I think every country in the region, I mean, you also, of course, I'll also plug another interview, because Geeta ma'am is not going to plug it, but her interview with Prime Minister of the Prime Minister of Bhutan, Tshering Tobgay, where he said as well, I believe that Rahul Gandhi did well as well. I think that some countries.
So I just asked him, what's your message to Rahul Gandhi, since the Gandhis are very close to the royal family. He said the royal family is friends with so many people. Please do watch the interview. But he said, my message to Rahul Gandhi is well done.
Right.
He worked very hard and he gained traction.
Right.
So that's a very strong message. But he also said that we don't believe in opposition, we believe in friends.
Absolutely.
So diplomacy, learn it from the Bhutanese.
Absolutely. I think with this is always going to be, I think a lot of countries are going to look at this and say, okay, the opposition is revitalized, we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to them moving forward. There was a sense, even among diplomats, in my conversations with them, there was a sense that, look, the opposition is down and out. Of course, they keep engaging with them, but for 10 years there, if they didn't have influence.
Shashank, we remember that, as per protocol, opposition leaders always went and called on any visiting dignitary.
Absolutely.
But in the recent past, I don't remember opposition leaders going and calling on visiting dignitaries.
There was a sense that the opposition had been diminished abroad, and I think that and now when you look at this, I think there'll be a sense of rushing to engage with the opposition, because of course for any country around the world, you're going to have to keep eggs in both baskets, right? You don't want to be seen as too friendly to one government or unfriendly towards the opposition party. So I think both countries, especially in the neighborhood, who are very, very sensitive to changes in Indian politics, will always be very, very careful about that. And so the fact that Sheikh Hasina is meeting opposition leaders, the Prime Minister of Bhutan said what he did, I think points to this change, that everyone acknowledges the tide has turned. And I think that also is one of the interesting things that the BJP government will have to deal with when it comes to foreign policy, which is that because of its, let's be honest, diminished position at home, will it be able to push priorities like the CA, NRC, or the next policy that comes up that has some of their signature imprints on it, but will the TDP, will the JDU really be interested in going ahead with it? I think that's always going to be a concern. And I think that weakness at home, if it does turn out to be weakness, could be a perfectly well-functioning government and coalition government.
I think it will.
Right,
I think
absolutely.
It will.
But if it does
with the way it has, I think it will.
Right.
But I do think that these are areas that now this government will keep as last of their priorities and focus more on the things that they have achieved so far and that they can achieve.
Right.
Because deliverables, right now, the message from these elections is that deliverables are the only things that
absolutely
matter.
That will get you that.
Everything else is going to only boot you out or make you put you in a very uncomfortable position
right.
when you're seeking re-election.
Yeah, I think, but if I would make just one point, I think that the BJP, the interesting thing about them is that I don't think foreign policy is something you switch on and switch off with them, because for them, their whole worldview, the ideological worldview of the BJP is sort of bringing India to a resurgence in Indian civilization, right? After thousands of years, we were a great civilization once, we shall be again, and we shall have power on the world stage. It very much fits in with their worldview. Yes. I don't think a BJP government is ever going to, like a truly ideological BJP government, I don't think is ever going to give up on foreign policy, because it fits so many of their goals. I feel like for them, just as much as housing and petroleum and home affairs and security, I think external affairs and foreign policy is a priority, because how they're seen on the world stage and how India projects itself on the world stage is a very, very key part of the ideological project as well that the BJP has. And so I think that for them, it's always going to be a priority. I think that's very interesting about them.
Okay, let's see whether if they're going to prioritize it more than what their coalition partners would be comfortable with.
That's an interesting one.
Because this government can't work without their coalition partners, and no matter what the policies are, they will have to ensure that it does not hurt their own. They're not their own cadre, not their own people, certainly not their votes.
Right.
Because this is not the last time that anybody over here in this party, in this political spectrum, is running for elections.
Absolutely.
They will be seeking terms after terms, families after families. That's how it works in India.
Right.
We have a lot of dynastic politics, and you're seeing that. You're seeing the names. Look at how many people from the coalition partners have come into the cabinet.
Absolutely.
Of which most are family members. So it is going to be very interesting to see how things turn up for India. But for now, Modi 3.0, the 4 big ministers have retained their positions. So you will see continuity there. But with a slight twist of change, I suppose, because of the twist in fate.
Absolutely.
On that note, Shashank and Geeta Mohan over here, both of us are going to close this session, but we will keep coming back to you for all the latest on how the government is, or how the world is reacting to this announcement of ministers, announcement of the portfolios, announcement of the new government here in India. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.